Welcome to this week's episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. This is your host, Matt Kirchner. Every once in a while, we have a topic that's so near and dear to me, so important to me, and I believe should be so important to the world of technical education that we devote the entire episode to the topic without any guests. And that is the case in this week's episode of the Tech Ed Podcast as we explore what education is getting all wrong when it comes to artificial intelligence. As you know, we are no strangers to the topic of artificial intelligence here on the Tech Ed Podcast. Talk about it all the time, multiple guests on the topic of AI. It is because it's so timely. I'm actually dubbing this summer the summer of artificial intelligence. Everybody wants to talk about AI, at least all the people I know, and I know 4,964 people. How do I know that number? Well, it is because I know 39 Michaels. I know 39 people with the first name of Michael. I tripped over this article in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year by Josh Zumbrin, and the title of that article is You Probably Know 611 People. It tells the story of Tyler McCormick, a professor of statistics and sociology at the University of Washington. He apparently had a ton of time on his hands, and he was able to use artificial intelligence to garner that the average person knows 611 people. The average person knows 4.8 Michaels. He also used AI to determine that information. Well, I know 39 Michaels, so a little bit of simple math can get us to the point that I know 4,964 people, and all of them these days, it seems, want to talk about artificial intelligence. The same, by the way, is true in education. Everybody in education seems to be talking about artificial intelligence, from lesson plans to lean learning, from cloud to course sequence to data sets to drones, from autonomous vehicles to autonomous mobile robots, ChatGPT to the changing role of the teacher. AI is transforming education in almost every way imaginable. There are 5 things in my mind, 5 things that educators are getting all wrong about AI. And I'm going to use this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast to clear up some misconceptions. 5 of them, as a matter of fact, 5 misconceptions that I think need to be changed, need to be altered, and need to be addressed in the world of education, particularly in STEM and technical education, as we continue through the summer of AI into next fall, when we will be back in our classrooms delivering amazing learning. Number one is that we are pigeonholing artificial intelligence in the world of computer science. And the misconception, put another way, is that computer science is where AI learning belongs. Certainly, AI belongs in computer science, but that is not the only place that we should be teaching artificial intelligence. Let me tell you a story. I was with a technical education teacher, a very prominent one in the Midwest, now several years ago, and I was lamenting a little bit the fact that especially at that time, 10 years ago, as I walked around technical education programs, very few of them were teaching authentic industrial technology, and this person's program was no different. And as I was suggesting to him that he should be teaching things like robotics and automation and mechatronics and welding in his tech ed program, he looked me in the eye and he was a little bit frustrated, and he said, the last thing I want to do is pigeonhole a high school student as a welder. Well, as somebody who had actually owned and run metal fabrication companies for a long time, I took a little bit of umbrage to that. I mean, the truth of the matter is that there's great and amazing careers in trades like welding, like manufacturing, like CNC machining, and so on. And so pigeonholing a student in one of those trades, while we certainly wouldn't want to tell a student that that is their only option, there's nothing wrong at all with teaching authentic manufacturing technology in a high school. But on this whole topic of pigeonholing AI in computer science is preventing us from teaching it in all of the other endeavors that we should be teaching artificial intelligence. There was a fascinating article earlier this year in the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about, and I'll quote that article, computer science is hotter than ever at U.S. universities, but students graduating this month are discovering their degrees are no longer a surefire ticket to tech industry riches. In fact, many are finding it harder than they ever thought it would be to land a job in the field of computer science. I think there's several reasons for that. One of them is that our tech companies in many cases have just slowed their hiring of computer science talent. But I think the other reason is that we have a lot of other career pathways now that can lead to really cool opportunities in technology that don't necessarily have to be centered just on coding and just on computer science. So we need to pervade every single course with artificial intelligence, every course, every class, every lab, every syllabus, every lesson plan, and every single discipline. We should be teaching AI across every level of education and across every single course in education, and how AI is affecting and changing whatever that course is in education. So misconception number one is this idea that we need to pigeonhole artificial intelligence learning in the discipline of computer science. It should pervade absolutely everything. Misconception number two is that artificial intelligence is ChatGPT. I was recently with a STEM teacher who runs a STEM program for a major engineering university in the Midwest. And he said that when he asks his K-12 students that visit the university to learn about engineering, to learn about technology, when he asks those students who visit his center what AI is, they all say ChatGPT. Now, where are students getting this idea that AI and ChatGPT are the same thing? They're getting this from their schools. When we talk to educators about artificial intelligence, and especially those in K-12, the discussion immediately turns to generative AI. The most prominent example, of course, being ChatGPT, how students are using or not using ChatGPT, what I call ChatGP cheating, which is using generative AI to cheat in the classroom. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later on. But those are the topics that can come up. That ChatGPT and generative pre-trained transformers are artificial intelligence, and that these are where we should focus all of our efforts and all of our concerns in the world of education. Well, the truth is that ChatGPT is AI, but AI is not ChatGPT, or certainly not just ChatGPT. In the same way that a Tesla is a car, but not all cars are Teslas, ChatGPT is artificial intelligence, but not all AI is ChatGPT. I just think about some of our businesses in the ed tech space and the way that we're using not just generative AI, but all kinds of AI platforms like Copilot, Perplexity, Otter AI, Midjourney, Click Dimensions, Ren Systems. We use AI all over our distribution companies. And the truth is that, yes, we use ChatGPT, but we go so much deeper. So we need to, in education, open our minds to understand that the most important thing that we can do in education is to help our students learn about all artificial intelligence and all artificially intelligent systems, not just in their AI coursework, but also in all of their other coursework. This goes way beyond ChatGPT to smart energy, to smart manufacturing, to autonomous vehicles, edge-to-cloud computing, and how every single artificially intelligent system does four things. They all have the ability to see on their own. They all have the ability to think on their own and make decisions. They all have the ability to take action based on what they're seeing and what they have thought about. And finally, they have the ability to communicate with other artificially intelligent systems and with computer networks. There are a lot of ways to do this, and that is outside the scope of this particular episode of the Tech Ed podcast. But we need to show students how artificial intelligence exists in every single aspect of what they're learning, what all artificially intelligent systems are doing. Mike Bigley of the Whitehall School District joined us a couple weeks ago on the Tech Ed podcast, and I love the quote that Mike offered as we were talking about how we adopt AI learning in the world of education. And he said, schools absolutely have to change. We have to change quickly. Our current system was built for a different time, and we got results, but those results don't match anymore what the world requires. We need to open up our mind about what ChatGPT is, and even more important, what all of artificially intelligent systems and what all artificial intelligence is, and make sure we're delivering the right kind of learning. As Mike says, schools absolutely have to change. Let's move on to misconception number 3. And misconception number 3 is that we need to fight to keep artificial intelligence out of the classroom. As we're talking to educators, and especially it really kind of covers all of middle school, high school, community and technical colleges, universities. We have a lot of folks out there that are saying, hey, if we're using generative AI in our coursework, that is not learning. We need to eliminate that. We need to eliminate that from the way that we teach. We need to catch students who are using generative AI in their learning, and we need to discipline them. We need to punish them. They should not be using it. I recently read a great book on artificial intelligence. Many of you have heard of this book. It's a book called Co-Intelligence. It was authored by Ethan Mollick of the Wharton School. And he says this, and I'm going to quote him directly when it comes to what I call chat GP cheating, or using chat GPT to cheat in our academic endeavors. Mollick says there is no way to detect whether or not a piece of text is AI generated. A couple rounds of prompting remove the ability of any detection system to identify AI writing. Even worse, detectors have high false positive rates, accusing people, and especially non-native English speakers, of using AI even when they are not. You cannot ask AI to detect AI writing. Either it will just make up an answer. Unless you are doing in-class assignments, there is no accurate way of detecting whether work is human-created. Again, that is Ethan Mollick from Co-Intelligence, a great book on artificial intelligence and how we must coexist in a world of artificial intelligence, pointing out that there really isn't any way for technology, or certainly for teachers and educators, to detect whether a student is using generative AI in their coursework. So there are a lot of different approaches that we see in the world of education to how we deal with the advent of generative AI in the classroom. Let me give you a couple examples. I read a newspaper article not too long ago, and the title of that particular article was Paper Exams, AI-Proof Assignments, Wisconsin College Professors Adjust in a World with Chat GPT. So the first example they offer is a gentleman by the name of Eric Eli. He is at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That is a great university. And he goes into, look, the whole idea is that generative AI, that artificial intelligence, this is the world that we're living in. In fact, his exact quote is, "This is the world we are living in. It is a disservice to limit or prohibit the use of generative AI inside and outside of the classroom." That is Eric Eli. He's saying we're going to put this right into our coursework. We are going to encourage students to use ChatGPT and other platforms to engage in the classroom and to do the work we're asking them to do. Now, 80 miles to the east in Milwaukee, at my alma mater, Marquette University, there is a professor by the name of Sam Kirchner. And he is addressed and talked about in exactly the same article that I read. And Kirchner says that he is going to absolutely ban AI and ChatGPT in the classroom. In fact, there is an AI ban that he places right on the syllabus for his courses. He makes his students sign a contract that says that they will not use generative AI or artificial intelligence in performing their coursework. Now, let me draw an analogy to what I think Sam Kirchner is doing. I have a good friend who's the leader of a nonprofit in the city of Milwaukee. It's an organization that I've worked closely with over the years, served on their board on and off over the years. And their building, this nonprofit, got hit with a generational rainstorm several years ago. Huge rainstorm in the city of Milwaukee, inch upon inch of deluge. It overwhelmed the streams, it overwhelmed the rivers, overwhelmed our storm sewers, overwhelmed our waste treatment plants, and the basement of the building in which this nonprofit did its work started to flood a little bit. So the executive director stopped by the building, and he noted that a small amount of water had begun to cover the floor of the basement of the building, and he started mopping up the water and getting rid of it, and the water kept coming. He kept mopping. More water, more mopping, more feverish mopping, even more water. And then he finally, as he was getting behind on this whole endeavor, he called in another member of the board, a real estate investor and developer who was accustomed to dealing with this kind of issue. And the board member arrived and saw what the executive director was doing, saw that he was just fighting this losing battle, trying to mop up this water. And he said exactly that. He said, give it up. You're fighting a losing battle. Coming back to artificial intelligence, I'm just going to suggest today that Sam Harshner of Marquette University and anybody else who's trying to ban the use of ChatGPT in the classroom and outside of the classroom, they are fighting a losing battle to try and stem the use of generative AI in education. Instead, we should be innovating our approach to education in the age of artificial intelligence. This means way less rote memorization. Memorizing facts and memorizing data, frankly, is going to become less important when we can get any set of data, any information we need is at our fingertips. And so way less rote memorization, but more regular assessment and classroom assessment so that we know that what we are getting from our students isn't necessarily created by artificial intelligence. It is created by themselves. We're going to see all kinds of assessment methods, from hands-on assessment, project-based learning, critical thinking, asking students about the meaning of what they are learning, letting students engage with generative AI, perhaps asking ChatGPT a question and then analyzing the answer that ChatGPT gives to the student, maybe asking them to find certain errors or certain misconceptions inside of the data that they are getting from generative AI. So we have to change the way that we deal with education. I think this is exciting. Somebody who always benefited from project-based learning, who never really saw the purpose in just doing math equations over and over and over again when I could get the answer from a calculator. Somebody who never saw the value in just memorizing facts and figures so that I could regurgitate them on a test and forget them a week later. This is really, really good news for education. The truth is that we have to find new ways to gauge intelligence, to gauge our students' mastery of their content, and I think that's a really exciting time for the world of education. So misconception number 3 is the idea that we need to fight to keep AI out of the classroom. That is a losing battle. We have to find ways to engage with AI inside and outside of the classroom. Misconception number 4 is that we don't have to worry about the risks of AI. I've been at some conferences where people start to talk about the risks of AI in education, and certain people just turn off to that, or they think that they don't need to worry about that. The truth of the matter is that one of the most important things that educators can do is, rather than trying to fight the use of AI in the classroom, let's just think about the areas where it might pose a risk and how we might be able to mitigate that risk. So the first idea of the risk is that AI, for many of us, is just a black box, right? I mean, we're taking this question, maybe we're getting better at prompting AI for our answers, but we're throwing the question over the wall and we get this answer from generative AI. And we look at that answer and we realize that we can never really fully trust that answer. And anybody who's using ChatGPT or other generative pre-trained transformers in this day and age recognizes that a lot of times the answers you get are really, really accurate and really, really interesting and on topic, and sometimes they aren't at all. So we have to recognize that there is a risk of using artificial intelligence, and that is that it's just basically a predictive model. It's taking a large language model and being trained on it and then just predicting whatever the next word is that it should say. And sometimes that next word that it predicts gets it extremely wrong. So the black box idea, the idea that we're just throwing the question over the wall to generative AI and getting an answer, we have to know that we don't exactly understand what's going on the other side of that. I worry a lot, and I think a lot about the decreased social connections. So many of us are social beings, and I would say that in our hearts and our spirits, human beings are social beings. We have certainly a need to be alone, but for most of us, we also have a need to interact with other human beings, and in many cases, that is what makes us uniquely human, are these relationships that we're able to create with other individuals. Well, in a world of AI where we don't have to interact with human beings quite as often and we can rely more on machines and machine learning and data and devices, we're losing this human connection. We're losing this human touch. And educators ought to be thinking about, in the day of artificial intelligence, in the day where we can literally spend almost our entire day in the digital world, how do we make sure that we're also accounting for this incredible need that we have as human beings to be social, to be together, to be around other people? Certainly, there's privacy concerns and data security concerns when it comes to artificial intelligence. I heard an analogy, actually, it was from a manufacturing company not too long ago that's delving into artificial intelligence now. And they start talking about, you think about the world of manufacturing where, in the past we used to have air-gapped manufacturing facilities. So I would have a manufacturing facility. It wasn't connected to anything else other than perhaps by a fax line or a phone line. And now, of course, we're connected in so many ways. But the truth is that there are tremendous privacy concerns and data security risks, especially if we're dealing with intellectual property, if we're using IP that's our own secret sauce that's unique to us, that would be harmful or pose a threat to our businesses or our organizations if it fell into the hands of the wrong people. So in education, we need to talk about those privacy concerns and how we continue to keep what should be private, how we continue to maintain data security. And going back to this manufacturing example that I heard the other day, somebody said, look, if you're interacting with generative AI, if you're interacting with ChatGPT, with Copilot, whatever platform you're working with, whatever information you're giving it, if you wouldn't be willing to have a piece of paper with that information and leave it on the counter at Starbucks accidentally and have somebody else pick it up, if you're not willing to take that risk with your information, i.e. leaving it on the counter at Starbucks, nor should you be providing that to generative AI, because who knows where that data is going as you're providing it. Now, there's some things we can do in terms of creating our own instances, in terms of creating firewalls and building a buffer between our own data and generative AI. But if we're just using some free version of ChatGPT, be careful about what information we are sharing with that platform, because God only knows where that data is going. Staying on the risks of artificial intelligence, we've all heard the stories of bias and fairness issues, and if depending on what data we're training AI on, it can go in some really, really crazy directions. There were some fascinating and concerning conversations about what happened with Microsoft earlier this year and late in 2023 when some of its platforms started providing some feedback and some responses that certainly weren't appropriate within the context that they were being provided. There's concerns about algorithmic errors that we've already talked about in terms of the black box idea, but that speaks to data security. It speaks to bias and fairness as well. So we have to be concerned about those types of things. We also have to make sure that in whatever we're doing, we're not over-relying on AI. AI isn't perfect. AI makes mistakes. And also, as we discussed, AI can remove that human touch and human interaction from our daily lives. There's other issues like educational inequality, like transparency, like understanding how to prompt AI in the way that makes it the most effective. There's ethical dilemmas with regard to how much we use it. These are all things that are worth debating, all things that are worth having conversations about and being really intentional in the world of education about creating policies and guidelines for how we, at the staff level, at the faculty level, and at the student level, engage with AI platforms today and into the future. So I've got one more misconception to share with you here on the Tech Ed podcast about our use of artificial intelligence, and that is misconception number 5, which says we need to fear artificial intelligence. I can tell you there are a lot of people, especially maybe those who are less engaged on the digital side, who are really concerned in the world of education, really worried about what AI means for the future of education. Now, I'm not telling you that we shouldn't worry a little bit, that we shouldn't be intentional, that we shouldn't be careful, that we shouldn't be methodical about our engagement with artificial intelligence, but the truth of the matter is we need not fear artificial intelligence. And if you do fear artificial intelligence, you're going to be set at a positional disadvantage in the world of education and elsewhere, because we are going to be using energy and worrying about AI rather than figuring out how we can use it productively inside and outside of the classroom. Earlier this year, I had the privilege of addressing the WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. That's the statewide Chamber of Commerce, Safety Council, and Manufacturing organization. I spoke at their manufacturing breakfast, close to 300 people in the audience. It was a really enjoyable morning for me, and I hope for the audience as well. One of the points that I tried to make over and over and over at that Focus on Manufacturing breakfast is that we don't need to understand AI in order to use AI. We don't need to understand exactly what artificial intelligence is doing in order to use it. And I think sometimes the fact that we don't understand it completely is the reason that some people are afraid of it. I will tell you, I was blown away by how many people that was their big takeaway from that presentation. I had people reach out to me for a week after and said, that really spoke to me, this whole idea that I can use AI without having to understand everything about artificial intelligence. I've got a good friend who's the vice president of business analytics for a big Fortune 500 company. We've had several conversations around this topic of not understanding what's happening on the other side of the AI wall when we engage with generative AI and feed it information and get information back. We don't really know what's going on behind the curtain. And he had a really prescient statement that's kind of stuck with me since he shared this with me a couple months ago. And he's somebody who works around AI all the time, of course, business analytics vice president. I mean, that's his job for a Fortune 500 company. He's inside and outside of data all day long. He said, look, man, you just have to get comfortable with the idea that you don't know how AI works, and you will never know exactly how AI works. If you spend all your time trying to figure out exactly what's going on with artificial intelligence, you will never use it to the extent that you need to in order to be successful with it. He said you have to be comfortable with the idea that you don't know how AI works. Let me give you an example that I think I've shared a couple times in previous episodes of the Tech Ed podcast. I was in Phoenix, Arizona late last year. I think it was early December, as a matter of fact. And I was running late for a meeting. I dialed up my Uber, and the Uber app said, "Are you okay taking an autonomous vehicle?" Well, I'm game for just about anything, and I was in a hurry, so I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll take an autonomous vehicle. Sure enough, not long after that, a car with absolutely no driver pulled up to the curb, and I got in. There was a little code that typed into the phone. The doors unlocked, got into the car. It drove me several miles to my next meeting. Literally a car with no driver. Now, talk about being comfortable with not knowing exactly what's going on the other side of AI. In many ways, I trusted my life to this artificially intelligent device, this artificially intelligent system, that being the Google Waymo car that I was driving around in Phoenix, Arizona. It's just a great example in my mind of the fact that we have to, and we are going to have to continually be comfortable with the idea that we don't know exactly how artificial intelligence works as we're using it. We just have to recognize that in certain circumstances, we trust that others who have done a really, really important work are not going to put us in a situation where AI could do harm to us, and we need to dive in and use it. So the final and fifth misconception when it comes to AI and education is that we need to fear AI. We absolutely do not need to fear AI. We should be diving all in the world of education and embracing artificial intelligence. So as we wrap up our time here on this week's episode of the Tech Ed Podcast, let's just really quickly recap those misconceptions that we talked about. Misconception number one is pigeonholing artificial intelligence in the world of computer science. I hope by the end of this podcast you recognize that in education we need to be delivering AI across the spectrum, using it and delivering AI learning across the entire spectrum of education, every single course, every single level of education, every single discipline. Number two, let's commit right now to immediately breaking the paradigm that AI is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence is so much more than ChatGPT. And if you find yourself in these conversations in the world of education, just focusing on generative AI as it relates to the conversation, we need to break that paradigm and recognize that AI is so much more of that. And if we limited our thinking just to ChatGPT, we're doing a huge disservice to ourselves and our communities. Number three, we have to end this futile attempt to keep artificial intelligence out of the classroom and instead face the reality that AI must be in education and adjust our approach to education. If we are wasting our energy and we are wasting our time trying to keep AI out, we are cheating our students and cheating ourselves out of an opportunity to embrace one of the greatest tools we've ever had to be used in educating the next generation of STEM and workforce talent and talent across every single spectrum and every single space within our economy. Number four misconception, let's be honest with ourselves about the risk of artificial intelligence and work hard to mitigate them, specifically this tendency that we are going to have spending less and less time in the real world and more time in the digital world. I'm as guilty of that as anybody, but we can't afford to lose that human connection and the human touch that is so important to what makes us uniquely human. Number 5, and finally, our last misconception, recognizing whether we fear AI or we embrace it, it is here either way. So rather than wasting that energy worrying about it, let's get on with utilizing artificial intelligence and delivering learning in the right way. The students, the employers, and the communities served by the institutions that figure this out first will be the beneficiaries, and in the end, education exists to serve them. And so too do we exist at the Tech Ed Podcast to serve students, employers, and communities. And in doing so, we play our small part in securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast as we explored 5 misconceptions in education as it relates to artificial intelligence, the 5 things that we absolutely have to eradicate from the world of education if we are going to drive technical and STEM education into the future. We referenced a number of articles and a number of resources on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. We have terrific show notes, as you all know, and you will find the show notes for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast at techedpodcast.com/AI misconceptions. That's techedpodcast.com/AI misconceptions. Thank you for being with us on this episode, and don't forget to engage with us on social. We are, as you know, all over social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, wherever you consume your social media, wherever you spend time in the digital world, the Tech Ed Podcast will be there. Find us, link to us, connect to us, comment. We would love to hear from you. And until next week on the Tech Ed Podcast, it's Matt Kirchner. Thanks for being with us.